Today we'll be singing.
No, we won't be singing yet.
We're not going to be singing yet.
No.
Laurel has done some big prep work over here.
Chris lets me pick the music. So today we're not going to sing right away. We're just going to dive into the story. And so last week we talked about Nicodemus.
Yes.
And now we're going to talk about the story of the Samaritan woman, the unnamed Samaritan woman. We do skip a small bit in there about John the Baptist, so sorry. But the Samaritan woman story is a great contrast to Nicodemus in many ways. They contrast with each other. Also, probably the longest non-crucifixion narrative in John. Probably the longest story.
Sorry, something's not connected.
Like, it's the longest chunk of verses that's a story besides the crucifixion.
Oh, sure. Yeah, John has these really long chapters, but that's not John's fault. That's some,
Yeah, other people do that. People made that up.
That's some medieval monk dude who...
Which we appreciate. It makes it easier to read.
Absolutely, but that was a medieval monk dude. That's not John.
Yeah. So this one is, what, 40...
This is like 41 verses.
There's like 41 chapters.
41 chapters. 41 verses, so we're going to split it up here. We're going to read like the first 20
this week, and then next week we're going to talk a little bit more about those later verses. So today we're going to really focus in on the story of the Samaritan woman, and next week we're going to talk a little bit more about what Jesus proclaims about himself in this story. Yes, if you've never heard it, this is a really, really, really wonderful story. So yeah. Shall we go, and then I can say her parts?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay.
Okay. A reading from John 4. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisee had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon.
A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her,
"Give me a drink."
His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?"
Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water."
The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?"
Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life."
The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty, or have to keep coming here to draw water."
Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back."
The woman answered him, "I have no husband."
Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true."
The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem."
Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father speaks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The word of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ. So, the Samaritan woman.
That's right.
Now, Chris, are you checking up on all your notifications?
No, well, I do
this. Are you
this.
as popular as Jesus?
No, I do this to keep track of comments, just in case they don't scroll.
Down.
I know, just in case they don't scroll.
Look,
though.
they're right there.
All right.
Wait, did we put our phones on Do Not Disturb?
I'm good. So,
So, Christopher,
yes.
I feel like I've heard this word Samaritan before.
Yeah. Weird place.
Wait, it's a place? I thought it was a dude. I thought there was the Good Samaritan. I thought Samaritan was just like a synonym for good people.
Yeah.
Is that true?
You would think so, but that's a totally different story for
What?
totally another time.
What?
Yeah.
So wait. What's a Samaritan?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, and we didn't prepare that at all. No. A Samaritan is a person who comes from
Samaria.
Samaria.
Who knew?
Now, get ready for the history dive here, just for a brief moment, so my apologies. But Samaria is a place that was formerly known as Ephraim, or the northern kingdom of Israel.
Samaria, northern kingdom of Israel.
Judea, the southern kingdom of Israel.
Southern kingdom of Israel.
Sorry, we should really get a map.
We should have. I told you to bring the whiteboard. All right, so Samaria, the northern kingdom, Ephraim. What happened to them?
Yeah, so around 780 BCE, they were exiled by the Assyrians.
Oh,
Assyrians.
So the Assyrians exiled the Jews in the northern kingdom.
Yes, they exiled the Israelites from the northern kingdom of Israel.
Bummer.
Now, their capital was a little town called Samaria.
What a twist.
And that land that used to be the northern kingdom of Israel, Ephraim, became known as Samaria because the capital city was Samaria. So, because someone likes history dives. I'm glad.
Jocelyn's like our one fan.
So, the big part here is that when that tribe, or those 10 northern tribes, disappear, essentially, there's like a gaping hole right there that the people of Israel understood themselves to be just that, a people.
Mm-hmm.
But then different cultures, different people were coming into that land and settling it. So you had some ancestors from the people who did settle there, from the Israelites, but then you also had other cultures come in, whether from the Assyrians and who they captured, or from local tribes in other areas. They begin to move into the land that was vacated.
Yes.
Right. Now the Assyrians are not the Syrians; those are different. Their
different
capital, the Syrians their capital is in Damascus, which we know today. The Assyrians, fun fact, are from Nineveh.
I feel like we've also heard a story about Nineveh.
Yeah, no, it's kind of weird. It's
no wonder Jonah didn't want to go there.
Jonah. Exactly. So, which will be another story for another time. But the major deal here is that the Samaritans over time, the southern kingdom of Judea, didn't really see that northern area, which is now Samaria, as actually like brother and sister relationship of Israel itself.
Yeah, they were more like divorced couple, less of like happily loving children of the same people.
Right.
Even though the 12 tribes, right, we know are the sons of
Jacob,
right? Jacob's well. Okay, so technically, in theory, Jesus, as an Israelite, is related to the people of Samaria, but they hate each other.
So, yes, for the Judean people,
yeah,
this is a huge deal, which usually gets glossed over because, honestly, there's not a whole lot of time usually to tell this.
Yeah.
But now we have the time, so
Aha!
we're going to talk about it. The big deal is that the Samaritans, they were the hated people for the Judeans.
People hated them.
You would, if you were a good Judean person, you would rather go around the whole land of Samaria than go through Samaria.
It's sort of, the kingdom split after King Solomon.
Yes.
So after the King Solomon, there was a big fight about who would be the next king, and then they had a bunch of real horrible kings, and eventually they split into two kingdoms. So I imagine, it's sort of like if the North and South had ended up splitting after the Civil War.
Yeah, in some ways it would be like that.
Kind of. It's not the same. There's a lot of other stuff going on in there. But if you're trying to grasp like any historical thing, that's sort of what it is. That like there's two now separate parts of this country who really, especially in the southern part in Judea, hate the northern Samaritans.
And they lived like that for about 200 to 300 years, or about the length of the United States. Which is interesting to put into perspective. But the major deal is that once they are captured and taken away, that northern kingdom, they were already having issues, about where to worship, who was correct in their battles and their fights, about theology and about who's the right king, those sort of things. Now it's even come to more of a head because are they even really a part of the tribes of Israel anymore? Some of them, intermarry with other cultures, and that's not what they practiced back in the day.
Yeah.
So there's already this set tension,
right?
Because Jesus, it says, it was necessary for him to go through Samaria.
So when you hear that, oh, it's necessary for him to go through Samaria, you imagine it's like it's necessary to go through Dumont to get to Hampton from Allison. Except we've recently learned with construction, it's not actually necessary. And so there are established patterns, okay? When I hear he had to go through Samaria to get to Galilee, it sounds like it's on his way, right? But it's not. Geographically, actually, it's not necessary to go through Samaria. And in fact, going through Samaria would be both physically and culturally really abnormal. So the first thing we hear in this text is that Jesus isn't going there by accident. And he's going into the place that means the exact opposite of who Nicodemus was as a person, right? A respected religious leader. A Samaritan woman is the polar opposite of that. Despised, rejected, not a person that you should be associating with, not even a person he technically should have to, because he should avoid Samaria altogether to get to Galilee.
Right. And so the next big point, though, is that really Jesus shouldn't even be in touch with this woman because it's at noon.
Noon, yeah, because when did Nicodemus meet?
In the dark.
In the darkness. In the dark of the night.
And so we've already talked about this before. If you haven't listened to our previous worships, the play between light and darkness. Something good's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen. Light's gonna be shed on this situation. Darkness is kind of hiding, not understanding some of those things. So we already got that interplay there. But also,
normally, Chris, if you were a lady and you had to go to the well in the middle of, I don't know, a desert, would you go during noontime?
Oh, absolutely not. You'd go during the cooler times, which would be morning and evening. But she's out here in the middle of the hottest part of the day by herself.
Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth would this woman be doing that? Well, because this woman is not a very popular one. And we need to talk about that for a couple of reasons. A lot of people have read this text in the past as this woman is sinful, and therefore they can't, like, she's a morally bad person. She's sinful and everybody doesn't like her, and that's why she goes to the well at noontime. However, she goes to the well at noontime to avoid the other people in her culture. So she's a bit of a pariah. Yeah,
she's kind of been placed to the outer edges of society, and it's something we're going to talk about in depth here, because this has been one of the most, misused. Is that a good word?
I'd say misused.
Misused way of understanding what's going on with Jesus and this woman.
So they're meeting at noon, which for John means that something will be revealed. They're meeting a Samaritan woman, which he really shouldn't be doing. And also they're meeting at Jacob's well.
Right.
So, that seems like an important place.
It is in many different aspects, but many famous scenes include Jacob. Right.
What a twist.
Jacob, because it's Jacob's well.
What?
Jacob, and he meets his wife
Oh,
there.
fancy.
Not only that, which is Rachel.
Rachel. Okay.
But not only that, his father Isaac
Okay.
meets his wife Rebecca there at what will be known as Jacob's well.
Wow. Anybody else?
Moses
Huh.
and his wife
Zephora.
meet at a well as well.
Is there something in the water?
No. There is a theological importance to this, though.
I do love it when there's a theological importance.
Kind of a biblical theme is that when you go to a well,
Specifically this well.
it seems like there's some sort of expectation that there's going to be a deep relationship.
There's an intimacy.
There's an intimacy.
Some people
here
go to
at the well.
seminary.
Yeah, some people go to seminary wells.
Yeah. Other people might go to the bar well.
I suppose.
Or like the OK Cupid well. But for the Israelites, Jacob's well?
Jacob's well.
Wow, that's such a weird date right
So
here.
so there's this connection even to, this wedding image that we've already talked about in
Okay,
John 2.
Yep.
There's this intimate relationship that is about to blossom here. Not necessarily like a physical relationship, but a spiritual, like a deep relationship that we're supposed to pick up on. And it's not only just between these two people.
Mhm.
It is specifically mentioning Jacob's well, which is in Samaria at this point. So not only that, but now Jesus, who is associated with the Judeans, is now going to be finding that universal or that unity with the Samaritans, which is Jacob's well. Right here in Jacob's well is where God has provided for the Israelites since they first began with Abraham.
Since before they were the Israelites.
Right, since before they were the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And so here is this place is a specific place where God has provided an intimate relationship with Israel.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is when you talk about intimacy, it brings up the very real idea that we believe in, which is that Jesus had real emotions, right? So Jesus needed intimacy. He needed water. One of the things that our study points out is the fact that Jesus comes to the well because he's tired and he's thirsty at the hottest part of the day, and he asks for water from this woman because he has no bucket. And it's rare that we ever see Jesus in need or that we call attention to it, but he does. He needs the water that she can give him. And so there's this relationship that isn't just top down, right? There's also this sort of mutual necessity between the two of them. And that's incredibly, this calling of both the nations together is incredibly important in the context of what we just read in John 3:16.
Yeah.
For God so loved Israel? No.
The world.
And what does God say to Abraham?
That you will be a blessing to the world.
Yep, to all nations. So it's not an exclusive promise. Exclusively, God will work through Israel, but that doesn't mean that the blessing is only for Israel. And even when Jesus pushes this, it's not just for Israel and the people Israel likes. It's for Israel and even the people Israel hates. So when Jesus meets this woman, it takes like 4 verses, maybe, for us to hear Jesus needed to go through Samaria. He met a woman at Jacob's well. But in those 4 sentences, we hear that it's noontime, so the truth will be revealed. A woman is there, which is weird. Jesus needs water. It was necessary for him to go to Samaria. And all of these things get really intertwined, and that sets the scene for his encounter with the unnamed Samaritan woman.
Right. So what we're already picking up is that as we've discovered here throughout our study is that Jesus is this new way of God coming into the world. Mm-hmm. And what we're already seeing here in chapter 4 is God's breaking all these different barriers. He's mm-hmm. breaking the Samaritan barrier. He's breaking the good rabbi barrier. He's breaking, a lone male and a lone woman together barrier. He's breaking spiritual theological barriers. He's breaking a ton of barriers just to get to this one place
to meet
to
this one woman. Now, we talk about Jesus breaking barriers.
Mhm.
Does that mean Jesus is breaking the rules?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. In some ways, the cultural norm has been broken, and so those rules
Mhm.
are broken. Theologically, no.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, and there's a difference in the Gospel of John between rules,
Mhm.
expectations, and sin. Like we talked about, and we don't need to rehash this because we talked about it last week. Sin is a separation. It's not a moral code. And that's incredibly important when we read about the Samaritan woman. Because what we hear, and we heard very, I think, vividly, is Jesus tells the woman, where is your husband? And she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, you're right. You've had 5 husbands. And the one you're with now is not your husband. And for a long time, people have heard that as this woman has been married 5 times, has failed to be a faithful wife 5 times, and is now living sinfully with another man. Guess what?
That's like going to the North Pole and asking for a McDonald's.
Yeah. No. What? That's the weirdest metaphor I've ever heard you make. It's wrong, okay? That interpretation of this text is wrong. She is not a sinful woman. How would we know if she was sinful? Well, if Jesus called it a sin, or maybe offered her forgiveness, which he does to a ton of other people, but he doesn't do it to her, because this is not her fault, okay? Let me be clear. This woman is sinful as much as any other human is, but that is not the defining character of her life. Jesus is not asking her about this to prove that she's some sort of immoral harlot.
So what I mean by going to the North Pole and asking for a McDonald's is that that's the wrong culture. You'd go to the United States to ask for a McDonald's, right?
I feel like McDonald's is everywhere.
Well, it's not in the North Pole, which is why I said it. So the reason I said that though is because we're transporting,
Putting on top
we're
of.
putting on top of we're putting our own cultural norms on top of this ancient norm, and the big deal here is that this woman had very little say in how her relationships were going.
Right. This isn't the case where a woman divorced her husband 5 times. You can't do that.
Or cheated on her husband, or you know,
any immoral decision. That's not what happened.
if she did, she would have been stoned.
Yeah,
back
she
in
would
that
be
day.
dead.
Right. So she's been 5 times. What's really going on here is that more likely than not, either her husbands have died, or her husbands have divorced her for little reasons like, things like, well, you're not cooking well enough, so I tire of you. More likely the case, though, one of the biggest deals was that she would be barren.
Yes. So a barrenness was a perfectly reasonable reason to divorce your wife. And when a woman was divorced, she had nothing. She had no money, no power. She couldn't work.
No family
No
to
family.
support her.
Once you get married, your family's like, bye! Which my family would probably be really into. I'm just kidding. My family was. And we get kind of a clue as to which one of those it is when we hear him say, the man you're living with now is not your husband. Because in Israel, they had this thing called
Levirate marriage.
Levirate marriage.
Or the kinsman redeemer.
What's a Levirate marriage?
A Levirate marriage is a complicated thing, especially for modern sensibilities, but essentially a brother or a relative of the deceased husband would then take on his wife to continue on the dead or the deceased's name. So in other words, it was up to the brother to have children with the wife so that his brother would have a legacy.
Yep. So even children had, like, if Chris died and I married his brother and we had a child, it would technically be Chris's child, according to Levirate marriage. Also, this is twice as weird if you know either one of Chris's brothers.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I'm me. But the big deal here is that it's not so much a morality thing as it is more of I would say a curse. An expectation of a curse or a sin that did happen but not necessarily associated with like leaving someone or
Right.
infidelity or anything like that.
Right. This woman is just cursed with really bad luck.
Right.
She's got a really tragic story. Basically, she's not the person people want.
But and in chapter 9, we're going to see this same idea pop up again, where a blind man is coming to Jesus, and people are asking, well, who sinned? Was it his parents or was it the blind man? The same thing is kind of happening here. Who did this bad thing to cause this curse to happen?
Yeah.
Is it this woman? Is it her parents? Is it her ancestors? Because that's a real question that the ancient Israelites had.
Right. And I think often we ask a similar question of, why are bad things happening? And in some ways you can isolate, we can look at it and see very deep cultural, historical reasons for things, which we never want to neglect. And at the same time, we recognize that human beings are sinful, and that's always going to be the case. And there are parts of this world that are broken that are just always going to be broken. And it sucks. Like, Jesus doesn't try to fix the woman. He doesn't, like, find a good spouse for her or make her womb no longer barren. Instead, he just names what's happened to her. And her response is,
well, you must be a prophet.
you must be a prophet. Now, when I hear the word prophet, what do you think of?
Money.
Okay. P-R-O-P-H-E-T.
Oh, right. Probably some person who can tell me my future
Ooh.
way off in the distance somewhere.
Yes.
Not the case.
No.
She reveals Jesus as a prophet because he is able to identify her true self.
Yeah.
He
Jesus.
brings out the truth of what's happening, the real thing.
Yeah. Jesus is a prophet not because he can see the future, but because he can see her.
Right.
I'm going to say it again. Jesus is a prophet not because he can see the future, but because he can see her.
And as John likes to kind of tie these things in with Genesis, with creation, with all these things, she shares many similarities with Old Testament characters. People like Rebecca, like Rachel, who are all barren.
Sarah.
Right? Sarah, who are all barren. People like Hagar, who do not or aren't seen, quote unquote, by God, but are seen by God. In fact, Hagar's one of the first ones to call God, Elroy, which is God who sees me, or God who hears me. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But God sees Hagar. God sees this woman here and says, "You are loved."
Yes. And that's kind of, I think, where we kind of want to rest for now. And we're going to talk about some more stuff about water and Jesus as the living water and all these different things.
And the question about the temple.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be a big one. But for now, we want to sit in that space of acknowledging that she is seen. And she's seen not as a curse, not as this, like, broken human being that nobody wants anything to do with, not as someone who is so anxious because of the way people look at her and talk about her that she's willing to go get water at the heat of the day, but as a person who can provide for Jesus water when he needs it. And that's really important.
Well, and Jesus invites her into a relationship with her.
Yep.
And that's more than just like a moral relationship, like how good are you doing? It's a literal one where Jesus is asking for water and he's saying, I am the living water. It's not about what she is giving, but more importantly, who she is.
Yes.
Which is what Jesus is talking about here. Yeah. And so I think we sit there and we say, for this time, who is it that this person is? This brokenness, this true nature of who this person is, who we are. How does God enter into that brokenness? How does God enter into that, what people see, or society, or the people who are cast out, if we're cast out, how does God enter into that?
Yeah. And that brings us to our song.
Man of Sorrows.
That's my phone. Yeah, so I was gonna say the song. I just put it out there. Yeah, so this has been a really hard week for a lot of reasons. We reached 100,000 deaths in the United States from COVID, which is awful, and heartbreaking, and just deeply tragic. We had a horrific act of violence in Minneapolis. People are suffering all over the world. People are suffering from grief and sadness and anger, and I think, and I too have been experiencing, just for myself and with others near me, a deep grief of lots of things. Some of them that have to do with big issues like race and illness, and some of them that are very, individual and personal. And that's very important and very real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today, Laurel's gonna play. I don't know how well I can sing this. I didn't have the time to practice or anything.
Again with the steak.
But how it goes, the important stuff, right?
Yeah.
But we lift up in prayer today George Floyd and his family.
And the community in Minneapolis.
The community in Minneapolis for the horrendous act of violence against him and all people of color. We pray for all people who are suffering the losses of COVID-19, those who have been placed in horrible situations because of actions by other people in power. Anything and everything that we can bring to God today. Why don't we listen to Laurel play and sing, and lift up your prayers in this moment. Hopefully this song is a prayerful song for you as well in this.
Oh, I'm going to have to ask you to move a little bit.
I'll just move over here.
You don't have to leave.
It's all right. You go.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been very helpful for me as we are grieving and we are sad, and also, we pray for people who struggle to view themselves as oppressors. We pray for people who do difficult jobs, like policemen and firemen. We pray for all of these people, and when we struggle with the big questions of when we feel like we are the woman at the well, which I felt very deeply in my life, we know that Jesus weeps with us. That's become one of the things I cling to in the midst of difficulty and fear. And so as we grieve and as we sing and as we think, we're going to sing this song. I did find out it's an actual hymn, so you can join in on the chorus if you would like to.
Stone.
Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for all the ways that you have loved us and cared for us. We give you thanks for all of the water that you have filled us with. Gracious God, be with all of us in our sorrows. Be with those who weep for George. Be with the policemen. Be with community members and leaders in Minneapolis. God, be with all of those who are suffering in the midst of COVID-19. We lift up 100,000 lives lost. We lift up those who love them and those who mourn them. Lord, we lift up to you the individual sorrows and griefs of our hearts. We lift up to you illness and treatment and diagnoses that we wish we could not have. God, we lift up to you all of those who are grieving, all of those who struggle with their mental and physical health. We lift up to our leaders. God, we know that you weep with us, that you care so deeply for us that you would cross any boundary, any world, even the boundary of death, to save us from ourselves, from our sin and our brokenness. Man of sorrows, what a name. For our suffering, for all of our pain, Man of sorrows, broken sinners to reclaim. You overcame the darkness and walked out of the grave. You overcame my darkness when you walked out of the grave. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Again, a big shout out to the people in Allison and in all of our communities, but a big shout out to the pastors in Allison, Jeremy, Pastor Kyle, and Pastor Craig. Thank you for putting this on the cable and doing this for us these past few months. And of course, remember the question that Laurel asked, Rosie, obviously, or Apocalypse.
Or the apocalypse. Which would you rather hear about in our June newsletter?
So go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.